Hello, in this tutorial we'll talk about how you can use Lua in Lightact. The first step is to import a Lua script. We do that by pressing Ctrl D and finding your Lua file. What Lightact does, it copies it into the local asset folder, which is relative to the project file that you created. So I'm going to open it in the Explorer. And here I'm going to open it in Notepad++, so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, great. So you see here I've got a couple of functions. Now, before we explain how all of this is created, let's insert a layer. And here you'll see that if I right click, there is a new since 3.1.2 version, you've got a new entry called script functions, and if you hover above it, you have a list of all your Lua files that you want to use. Now, and if you hover above those, you have a list of all the exposed Lua functions in those files. Now, what's exposed? Let's explain very briefly. Okay, so before we do that, I'm going to insert a node, this one. Great. So Lightact doesn't use all of the functions, all of the Lua functions it finds in a Lua file, but only those that have exposed keyword in front of it. You can use it either directly in front of it or maybe have one comment after that and so on. It all works. You can download this test file on our user guides. Just search for Lua Script user guide and there should be a link there with a file similar to this one. Okay, so the next thing that Lightact needs to know before creating a node based on a Lua function is what inputs and what outputs it is using. And that's created with these keywords that follow the exposed keyword. So here in the add function, this one, Lightact knows that the function requires 2 float inputs and it outputs 1 float. So for example, how this works is that if I insert a float, float reader and a float setter, like so, and connect it like so, you see that the what this function does, it basically adds these 2 numbers together. So what if you want to use another integer as an input and use a float and output a float, an integer, and a string? You simply add the int in the parentheses here and you type in all the parameters you want the function to output in the parentheses as well. Okay, so after I save the Lua file, the corresponding asset in the Assets tab here turns yellow and you can right click on it and click on Refresh Script. And immediately the node is updated. If Lightact detects that the input types and output types or the number of them changed, it will disconnect all of the connections just to be sure nothing goes wrong. And now we can, or actually what we'll want to do, of course, is to output some. So here we have a string, so let's output it like so, like multiply both inputs, and as a string I'm just going to output a myTest string. Save it. Here click on refresh and this is it. Okay, so let's create an integer reader and integer setter and string reader and setter as well, and connect all of them together like so, like so, like so, and like so, and like so. Okay, so So 2 times 3 is 6, so that's multiplication of both inputs, and this is just static, it doesn't change. So it always says my test string. Great. Now there's another type of a function that doesn't have any inputs or outputs, and that's, for example, this one. I think let's try that one. So if I go back to add to counter, if a Lua function doesn't have any outputs, you have the lifeline inputs and outputs. So you have to connect it like so. And what this does is it adds to the counter. So these functions are useful if you want to change some global variables inside the Lua script.